I don't know if you can hear, that's my cats running around. They decided that now is Zoomy hour. If you hear cat noises, no you don't. Hi guys, we're going to be going through all of the books that I read in August. There's only 4 books here, but I managed to get through 5 books in this month, and that is pretty good, if I do say so myself, considering last year I probably read a total of 2 books. So my goal this year is to read 50 books, and I'm at about 35, I think, so pretty much on track there, but figured I'd share some of the books that I read this month, and yeah, just have a little fun. I'll tell you what I rated them, all that fun stuff. So let's get into it. First book I don't have with me because I did return it to the library when it was due, like a law-abiding citizen. But the first book that I read in the month of August was City of Fallen Angels, which I believe is the 4th book in the Mortal Instrument series by Cassandra Clare. This book picked up the pace for me a little bit. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't as much of a trudge to get through like the last 2 were. And I say trudge meaning I was in a pretty severe book slump in June when I tried to read those books, and they just didn't get me out of it. That doesn't mean that they're bad books necessarily. It just wasn't what I needed to read right then in order to get me out of a slump. Since we're not focusing on Clary and Jace as much in this book, I get to see more of Simon, who is my favorite. In this book, we kind of delve into more of what it means to be a daylighter, or essentially a vampire who can walk around in the sunlight, and how that affects Simon, and people in positions of power are interested in basically acquiring him and his ability to do their bidding. It was also interesting to see how the Mark of Cain, which was a protection symbol that Clary put on Simon at the end of the 3rd book, how that manifests itself in protecting Simon. The Mark of Cain is actually something that is mentioned, I guess you'd say, in the Bible. So Cassandra Clare essentially took creative liberties in interpreting what the Mark of Cain would actually mean in a supernatural sense or in a magical sense. I thought her interpretation of it was fascinating. I would still recommend this series. I think overall I've given it 3.5, 4 stars. The books have been seeming to get better as they go along, which would make sense because I believe this was Cassandra Clare's first series ever. So the rest of the books that I read this month I actually still have with me because I have not returned them to the library, even though I probably should have a while ago. First off, right here, we have 1,000 Heartbeats by Kiera Cass. Now, this is a bit of a chonker compared to Kiera Cass's other books. She wrote the Selection series, which I probably read 5-6 years ago or so. I read them in high school. No, I read them in high school, but it must have been like 7 or 8 years ago now. Wow. Okay. Puts it a little bit into perspective. I enjoyed the Selection series when I was in high school, and I did not realize that she was continuing to write books that weren't in the Selection series, so figured I'd give this a go. I will say this book does have 2 POVs, which I'm not usually a fan of split point of views in books, especially if it's more than 2, because then it just gets really confusing for my brain and I can't distinguish between the characters' voices. I feel like the voices for the 2 main characters, Wenix and Annika, could have been a bit more distinct. They kind of blended together a little bit. There was a twist, but it didn't super make sense. It might make more sense if I went back and read it knowing what I know now. Kiera Cass's writing is pretty formulaic, so I thought that I had guessed the twist ahead of time, knew what it was, knew who did it, that kind of thing. And I was partially right. I was right about what took place. I was not right about who did it, and I don't remember when we were introduced to the character who performed the twist, essentially. It just, I don't know, it didn't make too much sense to me. Again, I might not have been paying attention well enough because this was kind of a speed read for me because I enjoyed the major storyline. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out why she went the route she did with the twist. Spoiler warning, just so I can better explain what I'm trying to process about this book. Annika is a princess, and she's essentially required to marry her cousin, like third cousin, twice removed, something like that. Her cousin Nicholas, because he is a threat to the throne, essentially, and her father wants to make sure that they cover all of their bases and that there's no way that he can take back what he believes is rightfully his. Nicholas is originally introduced to us as a stuck-up, stuffy courtesan. We're made to dislike him from the very beginning, but he seems to come around a little bit, and immediately my brain was like, okay, this can't be real. This can't be true. Annika likes to keep her hair down because that's what her mother, the queen, did. But Nicholas doesn't want her to do that once they're engaged because it makes her seem like a loose woman or doesn't show maturity or whatever. But she's always put her foot down saying she is the princess. She is an heir to the throne. She can do whatever she wants. And that's how she wants to remember her mother who passed away. She starts coming around to him a little bit, not enough to like actually fall in love with him, obviously, because our other character is the main love interest, but you get the sense that something is up with Nicholas and you don't know what it is, but it can't be good. About 2/3 of the way through the book, we come across the information that there is some sort of spy in the castle with Annika and her brother, who is the heir to the throne. And we're led to believe that the spy who's like giving out information is Nicholas, and because this is a whole scheme that Nicholas has come up with in order to take the throne and become the rightful heir or whatever. It makes sense, you know, that would have made sense. In the end, Nicholas is confronted by Annika and Lennox, who is the main love interest, who is on the other side of this war. That's the whole plot, essentially, so I'm not going to go into that. But Nicholas gets confronted by Annika and Lennox, and he doesn't have any idea what they're talking about with the spy for the other side. No idea. We end up finding out that the spy is just some random guard that apparently we got the name of at some point. So I didn't understand that because I feel like it would have made more sense to give Nicholas a bit of a motivation besides him being upset that he is not the heir to the throne and being a bit of a prick. That part I didn't super understand or love, but if you're looking for a classic kind of fairy tale-esque book with romantic tension but no spice, this is the one for you. I actually really enjoyed it, and I got through this book in about 4 days, which, considering it is almost 600 pages, pretty good for me, if I do say so myself. The third book that I read in August, oh boy, If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan. This book came recommended to me by my younger sister, and wow, I cried a lot. First of all, the main character's name is Autumn, which is my name. A lot of trigger warnings. Look them up on Goodreads or Fable before you read this, but I did rate this book 5 stars, I believe. 4.5, 5 stars. I cried reading it. This book takes us through Autumn's life from childhood until senior year of high school, right before heading off to college. It essentially explains her relationships with everybody who is ever in her life throughout that entire time. Her relationship with Her dad is strained because he's never home, and he eventually ends up divorcing her mother. Autumn's mom and her best friend ended up having children at the same time. So they were essentially raised as best friends throughout their childhood. They ended up going their separate ways for a bit in high school just because they're two different people. Autumn is trying to figure out her mental state just constantly throughout this book and shows her personality and individuality through being edgy and having cool friends, not necessarily popular friends. Whereas Finney is on the soccer team, has a preppy girlfriend named Sylvie, all that fun stuff. We see Autumn realize that during her high school years that she is in love with Finney. He's been her closest friend since day one. She doesn't know what to do without him. It kind of sends her into a mental spiral of sorts because he's dating somebody else, she's dating somebody else. They're not in each other's friend groups at all, not even on each other's wavelength in the school cliques. Spoiler warning. Unfortunately, she finds out too late. And, the last 2 chapters of this book broke me. I borrowed this book from my sister. If you're watching this, I am sorry for the tear stains on some of these pages towards the end of the book. This book hit home for me because it portrays anxiety and depression in a teenage girl so incredibly well. I experienced both of those starting in my teenage years, and I would not be able to put those feelings into words as well as Laura Nolan did in this book. It brought me to tears several times because of how just close to home those parts hit. Plus, the ending is just tragic, and if you can get through this without feeling some kind of emotional pain, you must be a psychopath. I understand this won't be most people's cup of tea because, again, a lot of people were never a teenage girl. And a lot of people were never a teenage girl with depression and anxiety and difficulty figuring out what love is and whether or not they truly have feelings for somebody. And that's okay. Now we get to the last 2 books, which, we ended the month with a bang. This is going back into my childhood again, kind of like the Kiera Cass book, but way better. I read the Gilded Duology by Marissa Meyer, her newest little series that she's come out with. Oh my goodness. I read the Lunar Chronicles in high school. That was her first series. And those are still some of my favorite books to this day. I will recommend them to the moon and back. If you don't know Marissa Meyer or any of her work, she does really, really good fairy tale retellings. The Lunar Chronicles is more of a kind of a futuristic story that encapsulates 4 different princess fairy tales. So Cinder, the first book, Cinderella. Scarlet, the second book, could be interpreted either as a Little Red Riding Hood retelling or a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I see it as the second one, but it could be either. Third one is Cress, which is my personal favorite, which is a Rapunzel retelling. The fourth one, Winter, is both a Snow White retelling and encapsulates the entire arc of the whole series. So the mini arcs in each book, beautiful, but the overarching story is wonderful. So anyways, I had very high expectations when I found these at the library, and I believe the second one just came out last year, maybe. So these are new to me. These books are a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. One of the most intriguing fairy tales to me. To make a long story short, a princess or a maiden, it's different in different versions, gets kidnapped essentially by a evil king who believes that she has the ability to spin straw into gold. She doesn't have this ability. It's all a rumor, but the king won't take no, I can't do it for an answer. So he gives her a certain amount of straw every night, tells her she has the night to spin it into gold, and he will come back in the morning, and if there is no gold, he will execute her. But if there is, he'll let her live another month. The maiden, since she can't spin straw into gold, cries out to anyone who will help her to save her from the king killing her. And Rumpelstiltskin appears. Usually he's described as a little elf man, think kind of leprechaun-esque, and he does have the ability to spin straw into gold. But because magic requires a price, she needs to give him something of value in order for him to give her his gift of spinning all the straw into gold. This works out for a couple nights, but the third night, the maiden doesn't have anything to give to Rumpelstiltskin. So, because this is a fairy tale, and this is how fairy tales work, she makes the promise to give him her firstborn child, which does not exist yet, obviously. Apparently, Rumpelstiltskin thinks that a promise like that is valuable enough to bestow his gift. So he does. In the end, usually the evil king ends up marrying the fair maiden and they have a child. The new queen forgets about the promise that she made to Rumpelstiltskin until the child is born and Rumpelstiltskin comes to claim his dues. So that's the fairy tale that we're starting off with here. Obviously, there's a little bit of a twist to it in this version. Ooh, where do I even start? There is romance in these books with little to no spice, which, again, my preference. And there is a trope featured in these books that I usually despise, but it actually makes sense. Since this is a loose retelling of that fairy tale, I'm not going to explain the whole plot to both of these books. But what I will say is the characters are so individual and unique, and I don't know what I was expecting. There's a whole background for this world that kind of ties to the scary side of German fairy tales. Serilda, the main character, was cursed by the god Wirth, Wyrth. She's generally average looking, but her eyes are striking in that they are black with golden wheels in them. This means she's immediately labeled as Wirth, the god of fortune, or also known as the god of misfortune, because obviously for most people, chance is never in your favor. Serilda is immediately introduced to us as a storyteller. She's the assistant to the village teacher. We're introduced to 5 children from the school who adore her. They love her stories. Each one of the children has their own individual personality, and they are just adorable and lovable. I love how individual they all are. We're not immediately shown why they are given such detail, but they do end up coming back later in the story and being held over Serilda's head. But from the very beginning, we're shown that Serilda loves children. She does want to get married and have kids someday, but she doesn't think it's in the cards for her because she is the outcast of society as a whole. Serilda, because she is a storyteller, she ends up making up fantastical stories. They just come to her brain. She's very good at what she does. The problem is, stories get around, and she tells a story about how she was gifted with the ability to spin straw into gold. The big bad of the story, the Earl King, gets a hold of this, and we don't know why at the beginning, but he needs a bunch of gold for something dubious. And of course, if he hears that someone can spin straw into gold, he immediately goes to her house and kidnaps her. While Serilda is at the palace, of course, she can't actually spin straw into gold. The only thing she can do is spin stories from nothing in her head. She tries to cover up who she is with lies, being like, yes, of course I can do this. The Earl King believes her and throws her in a cell with some straw, says she has until the morning to spin it, yada yada. We're losing right fast, so the candles have come out. Long story short, the Rumpelstiltskin character in the story is a boy about Serilda's age, so 18, 19 years old, who was blessed by the goddess Hilda, which means he can spin things into gold. Hilda is essentially the resident poltergeist and does whatever he can to wreak havoc, bless you, on the Earl King's existence. And it is hilarious. The twist is Gild is the lost prince of the castle that the Earl King is currently inhabiting, which is super cool. I didn't see that necessarily coming. He's not quite a ghost, but he's not mortal either. He's kind of in this limbo state, which we find out later is because the Earl King cursed him to be forever bound to the castle because he killed the Earl King's bride. The trope in these books that I usually despise more than anything because it never makes sense. It's always out of the blue. It's always just to throw in some kind of conflict, is the accidental pregnancy trope. Spoiler alert. Serilda becomes pregnant and Gild is the father, but Serilda is not allowed to tell anyone that the father of the child that she is bearing is not the Earl King, because the Earl King marries her in order to produce an heir, and he doesn't want anyone questioning that it's not his child. So even though she has many encounters with Gild afterwards, she's not allowed to say anything. So Gild just thinks that it's the Earl King's baby, just like everyone else does. The thing is, we've already pre-established that Serilda loves children. She very much wants this child, and she wants it with Gild specifically. Nobody knows that the child is Gild's except for Serilda, and the child is conceived after she made the quintessential promise of her firstborn child to Gild, which of course she never thought she would have to worry about because she didn't think she would ever have a relationship, get married, any of that. It adds a little bit of a really cool twist to the classic storyline. This is the best execution of the accidental pregnancy trope that I have ever seen because it is true to the original fairy tale, but still makes sense with the characters involved. It's just very well done, in my opinion. I think I rated Gild 5 stars and Cursed 4.5 stars. The second one was a bit harder to get through a little bit towards the middle because there was a lot of folklore details that kind of had to bog through. The concept of being able to create stories into reality and bringing back spirits from beyond Verloren, which is their version of hell, essentially, or the afterlife, was really, really cool to me. And I just really enjoyed these books so much. The characters were wonderful. Plus, Gild is just a cutie. Those were the books that I read in August. We had a really surprisingly good reading month. I had a book that I cried over. I had several fantasy books that I just were wonderful, and I would honestly recommend all of the books that I read. So, but specifically the Marissa Meyer books, because I just adore this woman's writing so much. It reminds me how cozy and safe this form of escapism can be, and I just really loved it. Thank you for watching. I'm hoping to do one of these kinds of videos every month, especially if I can keep up my reading in my free time. I know the next couple months are going to be busy for me because of holidays and things, but I'm so excited. It finally kind of feels like fall. It was 65 degrees outside this morning, and I obviously am trying to dress for the fall that I want, not the fall that I have right now, wearing long sleeves and things. But yeah, some very, very cozy, fun fantasy reads this last month, and I'm excited for what I have on the docket for me to read in this month, September. I've already finished one book for September so far, and I have some really good ones next on my list. So I can't wait to share those with you in a month. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. Enjoy the seasons changing if you can, if you're in a place where that happens. I'm hoping to collect some books that I want to read during spooky season. So if you have any recommendations, throw them in the comments down below for me. And I want to compile a list to share with everyone. And I also soon want to post a video on a costume that I've been making. My husband and some of our friends are going to Ren Fair in November, and for once I'm actually planning a costume in advance, so that's been a lot of fun, making something from scratch. So maybe you'll see some of that next. Who knows? My cats say hello. Support your local library, and the next time you get a chance, make a cup of tea and read some of that book that you've been meaning to get to for a while. We all have one. It's not going to read itself. I'll see you guys next time. Bye. I think it's City of Fallen Angels. City of Fallen Angels. I get all of these book titles confused. Oh, my cats are dreading me. Holy cow. Are you little grumpy gills? Name's not Sebastian. Simon. Jeez Louise.